It's that time of year here at the International Art Doll Registry podcast where we will be discussing spooky things that go bump in the dark. I am Leslie. And Bambi, are you ready to get into this Halloween season?
Yes, I am.
So, thinking about it, what is a scary movie with dolls that affected you and your perception of them?
Well, for me, I don't really tend to watch scary movies anyway. I kind of stay away from them. And the only really scary movies I saw were ones that um boys took me to in my very early dating years. So, at the risk of giving away my age, I can't remember what it was called now, but it was the one with Anthony Hopkins where he had the ventriloquist doll, and
Mhm.
Anne Margaret was in it also. I'm pretty sure it was in the late 70s, 79, maybe 80, maybe 1980 or something like that. Of course, I was only like, two
Of course.
when I went to see it. But that was very definitely scary for me. And I like I said, I don't really watch too many scary movies, so I haven't seen any of the others. But of course I certainly know all of them, Chucky and Annabelle and stuff like that because they're so I don't know if popular is the word, but they're so infamous, I guess.
Exactly.
How
To
about
say,
you?
well, for me, and again, because Alfred Hitchcock TV series was at home, you could just turn on the TV and they were right there. So it wasn't even as intense or gory as some of these new modern movies are, but the suspense was certainly there. And so, yeah, it was one of the TV episodes where this little girl had one of these dolls that was supposed to be haunted, and it was kind of like, yeah, it changes your perception of dolls. And that's again,
Yeah.
like I said, I realized when I was thinking about it as we talked about getting ready for this podcast, it's kind of like it broke our trust that we have with our dolls, that they should be there for us. They're our imaginary friends, they're our best friends. And all of a sudden we now can no longer trust them because we don't know when they're going to turn on us.
Yes, I write and stab us in our sleep.
Exactly. And so and that's the reason why I was having to think about it, because as you said earlier, is that with the movies, I mean, it was really all the big thing in the 1950s where all the horror movies, the Blob and the ant people coming to attack you and stuff, that of course they're going to have to start taking dolls into that perception too. And
Yeah.
it's also kind of interesting is because more often than not, your French Brew dolls, which were very popular in the 1800s, were the ones that they would pick because of them being the frilly kind of high-ended porcelain dolls. You wouldn't think about them coming after you with a knife in their hands.
Yes. Right. Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I think that I think that in the early history of doll making and stuff like that, and the initial purpose of the doll was for companionship, as we've spoken before in other previous podcasts, which be sure to check those out if you haven't already. But we've talked about how they were served as companionship and learning tools and things like that. And I think that once those dolls started becoming more lifelike and looking more real, and the child in us kind of grew up and started having more preconceived notions about when we talk to people, we look for facial expressions and body movement and all that kind of language like that physical language that we don't get from dolls. And I think a mixture of that and the kind of freaky look in their eyes, and I remember kind of being a little scared of dolls that their eyes would close when you would tilt them back and then they'd open again. And I would be thinking, can that doll just open and close its eyes at any time and be looking at me? So I think those kind of things, especially as they started to get a little bit more realistic looking, um, our brains are just kind of hardwired to feel threatened by that.
Well, and I think also we were comfortable with them and we wanted to love them.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and Hollywood definitely wanted to take that comfort zone and push you out of it. And so,
Well, that's certainly what Hollywood does.
mhm.
As soon as they find a fear that humans have, they latch on to that and then they exploit that. So certainly they fed that fear and fed that fear beginning, early on. You talked about an Alfred Hitchcock, and I remember reading about a doll from one of the Twilight Zone episodes also that was kind of scary. So yeah, once Hollywood found out, oh, that's something that everybody's afraid of, let's take a hold of that and run.
Exactly. So kind of goes back to then, because I mean, especially at Halloween time, now is when all these movies come out. And so, as you said earlier, I'm not into watching them either because, as they say, people may love to get scared, but there's a lot difference between gore and scary. I mean, that's one
Oh
reason
yeah.
why I am a Alfred Hitchcock lover, is because he was more about suspense.
Yes.
And sometimes he would come up to a good conclusion in his episodes, where with just the gore and the blood and the chopping off and stuff, that's to me not that's not scary.
Right.
That's dehumanizing and stuff. And so it kind of goes back to, then it makes me wonder, then how do we change the perception of people? I mean, when I did my Renaissance fair, I would have kids walking by and say, "Oh, dolls are scary," and I'd start talking to them, and I'd give them my little spiel, and I could tell that when they walked away, they had a different look now of dolls. I mean, not that I changed their idea that dolls still weren't going to be scary, but for that little brief minute, I had them thinking, "Well, they're not so bad," you know.
Yes, yes, yes. And for me, my style of doll is certainly humanoid, but has a little more, a little more of a fantasy look to them. So when I create a doll, it has its own backstory. It has all about its life and what part of the forest it grew up in, what tribe it belongs to, if it has special skills like healing or warrior fighting skills, any of those kinds of things. And so I think that helps to personalize them a little bit and kind of make them seem a little less frightening because you kind of know them a little bit.
Oh, exactly. In fact, it was actually my son who it got me started, because, as he said, if you're going to do dolls, talk about them, give them, a story with them, because the more that people get to know them, then they don't feel threatened by them. So I think that it's very
Yes,
helpful that you and I both recognize that as a way to be able to get people to be less scared of them. Because
certainly. I think the more inanimate they are, the more frightening they are because
Mhm.
I've kind of heard people, I kind of heard about some people being a little, how people are afraid of robots and that kind of thing because they seem so lifelike. And again, I think it's kind of threatening to us as human beings.
Well, yeah, because especially because in some respects, the very first thing that comes out of my thought process when you say robots, because we have no control truly over them.
Yeah.
And
Yes, yes.
and that's the
Yes,
reason.
and of course, then all the science fiction stuff we've always read about and watched, even if they're not horror stories, they're still frightening to us because are robots going to take over are they going to take over?
Exactly. They're smarter than us. Are they going to, figure out, it's kind of like the one Alfred Hitch or Twilight Zone movie, is when the aliens came to land, and they were more or less came up with their recipe book, and it was supposed to be how to serve man, and you actually found out it's because they were going to eat you.
Oh, oh, oh my God.
So yes,
Wow.
I mean, those little twists that
Oh,
because it's interesting that the movie that you remembered, especially with the actors that were in it, did you remember it better because it was scary versus if it would have been without that intense fear in it? Because I know fear also helps us to remember things better sometimes.
the movie I saw, I don't remember anything about the movie except that two obviously famous people now. I'm sure they weren't famous at the time.
Mhm.
Anthony Hopkins and Margaret. I mean, they were well known, and Anne Margaret, of course, had been around. She was a sex symbol in what, the 60s, I think, right?
Yep.
So people knew who she was, and she was still really young then and all. But my goodness, I was only 15 at that time. So, you know, it really stuck with me, those actors and that doll. I can still picture that doll in my in my mind, you know.
Exactly, exactly.
And but I don't remember anything else about the movie. I don't even remember the title.
Right now we need dolls. We need that escapism. We need to be able to find a way of being able to enhance ourselves or get rid of stress. Anything that these dolls that can, as we talked about before in our other ones where mental health helps with it, that to be afraid to play with dolls or interact with them or sculpt them or whatever, it seems a shame that that's not a source that people think about because of their fear of dolls.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. And you're right. We do right now, we need any kind of therapy that we can get.
Exactly. So, and that's to come, I think our podcast is good because in that way we have a way of letting people realize that there is alternative options to think about
Yeah,
some of the things that they fear.
yeah,
Because they're not the only ones that has
yeah.
been in this.
Yes, but I would like to invite people who are watching or listening to this podcast right now to kind of tell us about some of your fears and how you deal with them during these times right now. And certainly, if you are afraid of dolls, if you have a fear of dolls, kind of tell us about that. I'd be interested to know, is it a certain kind of doll? Is it an old, like antique doll versus like a new baby doll that you might buy for a kid, or, you know, any of those kinds of things? It'd be interesting to see what our audience, how they feel about dolls.
True, true. Yeah, that would be a good point because, and
Yeah,
see where that influence came from. Was it because of some experience that they had, or was it from
yeah,
watching movies?
yeah. Happy All Hallows Eve to everyone who's listening.
Otherwise, also please join us on our Facebook page or visit our website as listed in the comment section below as well.